Have you ever found yourself driving the wrong direction? This has happened to me way too many times because, if you don't know, I am directionally challenged. And there was one time when I was living in St. Louis, I was trying to find my way home, and I didn't exactly know where I was going. In fact, I totally didn't know where I was going, but I had a GPS on my phone, so I was using that. The problem is, at some point, my phone decides to die, along with the GPS. And it happens right at the moment when I have to decide, do I go right or do I go left? And so I went with my gut instinct, which is never a good idea, by the way. But this day I decided to go right. And at first it looked like the correct choice to make. Everything looked familiar. It seemed like I had nailed it that day. Who needs a GPS? And so I'm driving down this road for a while. And I start to realize that nothing is familiar. Matter of fact, I start to see signs that indicate that I am on my way to Chicago. And I don't want to go to Chicago. But now it's too late. There's no more exits. There's no more places to turn on the median. I am stuck on this road to Chicago, and I am freaking out. What am I going to do? How am I going to turn around? And so I did probably one of the most insane things I've ever done. And I looked for the flattest portion of the median that I could find. Yeah, some of you already know. And I turn into this median, praying to Jesus that I'm not going to bottom out my car. And then I turn into the road, going the other way, praying to Jesus I'm not going to get hit by a car. And thankfully, I made this illegal turn perfectly. I pulled it off, and now I am zooming down the street back the way I just came. But my problem isn't solved. I still don't know where I'm going. My phone is still dead. And so I'm driving down this road praying, Jesus, what am I going to do? How am I going to find my way home? And I didn't come up with any solutions, but I start to see signs that indicate that I am exactly where I'm supposed to be. Matter of fact, this is the way I wanted to go. I had been on the right road the entire time, going the wrong direction. And it was in this moment that I had this epiphany. And it's not like a brain buster. It's not going to blow your mind. But essentially, I learned that you will never arrive at the right destination going in the wrong direction. Now, this principle is not just about driving. I think this principle applies to other areas of our lives. In fact, I think it applies to your relationship with God. Because the reality of the situation is, you are never going to earn your way to heaven by doing more good than bad. You are never going to make Jesus love you more by being more religious. And you're never going to find security in who God says you are by looking to other people to approve of you. But also this principle applies to the season we're in right now. I think it applies to the Christmas season. Because, like we've been talking about for the past several weeks, you are never going to discover the purpose of Christmas by looking in the wrong places. Whether that's traditions, gifts, decorations, or fun holiday parties. And yet, every year, we do this to ourselves, where we nearly kill ourselves trying to have the best Christmas ever. And so it begs the question we've been wrestling with for the past month. What is the purpose of Christmas? Why do we do the things we do? Why is Christmas so chaotic? And why do we put ourselves through this year after year? And what we've come to, the conclusion we've come to, is that Jesus, the person of Jesus, is the purpose of Christmas. It all centers around him. But if that's true, then now I have to ask a more personal question. I have to ask you, is Jesus the purpose of Christmas for you? Because the reason this is such an important question is the heart of Christmas can be summed up in one fundamental truth. Jesus came to do for us what we can never do for ourselves. You see, if we're honest with ourselves, we know how easy it is to get this twisted. Especially when it comes to the Christmas season. Especially when it comes to our faith in God. And we find ourselves going in the wrong direction. We find ourselves believing that everything depends on what we can do. And so we become hyper-focused on doing more to get people, maybe even God, to love us more. And so you'll work long hours to get your boss's approval, even though it is hurting your family. You will refuse to be honest with a friend about something they said or did that hurt you because you can't stand to try to be honest with them. You don't know how that's going to go, and you don't want to deal with it. Maybe you'll make compromises in a relationship you're in because you're terrified of being alone. And you're afraid if you stand on your convictions, they won't want to be with you. You see, as a result, we wind up living from a place of fear rather than from a place of love. But we're not the only ones who have wrestled with this. We're not the only ones who have struggled with this idea that I have to somehow earn my way into God's good graces. I have to somehow earn my way into the good standing of other people. Because humanity has been wrestling with this for thousands of years. And in particular, there was a time in Israel when the people of Israel really struggled with this mentality of trying to get God to love them more. And it was a time when you would find that the person struggling the most, it wasn't the common Israelite. The person struggling with this mentality the most were the religious leaders. They were the people who were most devout in their pursuit of God. But they had come to some pretty wrong conclusions about what the Messiah was going to look like when he showed up. Because in their minds, they're thinking, he's going to be a military leader. He's going to be a priest. He's going to be a prophet. And the reason for that is because at this time in history, Israel was under the rule and dominion of the Roman Empire. And they didn't like that because Rome was incredibly cruel. And they were desperate for someone to come and kick off the restraints of the Roman government, to make them into a national superpower again. Because Israel used to be a force to be reckoned with. And they were hoping that someone would come to reestablish that kind of nation. They were hoping that someone would come to reestablish them as a holy nation. They were hoping for someone to come and declare the wrath of God against the Roman Empire. Because that's the way it used to be for their ancestors. God would never allow oppression to go without being dealt with. So imagine their surprise when the Messiah finally comes and he doesn't look anything like that. And in fact, the Messiah comes in a way that no one was expecting. He shows up in the form of a newborn. And he shows up in a manger out in the middle of nowhere. And this Messiah, he's powerless. He can't speak. He can't even change his own diapers, let alone save the nation of Israel from Rome. And yet this is how the Messiah showed up. And in John 1:14, we're told that the Word became human and made his home among us. Now, when John is talking about the Word, he's referring to Jesus. And he's saying that Jesus existed since the beginning of time. He's saying that Jesus was fully God. And even though he could have shown up with phenomenal cosmic power, even though he could have brought Rome to its knees with a snap of his fingers, with one word from his lips, instead, he chose, this all-powerful God chose to become human. And he chose to make his home among us. Scholars refer to this idea that Jesus abandoned his sovereign position, that he willingly subjected himself to the limitations of being human. They refer to this idea as the doctrine of kenosis. Now, you might not be a student of theology, and some of you knuckleheads think I'm talking about Star Wars right now. I didn't say the doctrine of Kenobi. I said the doctrine of kenosis. And that word is Greek for to empty. So this doctrine of kenosis, what it essentially means is that Jesus emptied himself of his privileges. He emptied himself of his desires, and he emptied himself of his glory. He humbled himself in birth, and he humbled himself in life. Now, John the Baptist knew this was true. He also knew that Jesus didn't empty himself of his divinity. Somehow he was fully God and fully man. And John goes on to tell us in verse 15, he testifies about Jesus when he shouts to the crowds, "This is the one I was talking about when I said, someone's coming after me who is far greater than I am, for he existed long before me." See, even though technically Jesus was John's cousin, John knew there was something different about Jesus. He knew Jesus wasn't just simply some other guy in Israel. He knew that he was actually God. He knew that before Jesus took on a human form, he existed in another form because he is the creator of the world. He also knew that Jesus had come to usher in a new way of relating to God the Father. A new era of God's faithfulness and his love had come through Jesus. And so he goes on to tell us in verse 16, from his abundance, we've all received one gracious blessing after another. For the law was given through Moses, but God's unfailing love and faithfulness came through Jesus. You see, these religious leaders, in their efforts to make God happy, in their efforts to keep themselves in God's good graces, they had become so focused on living out this law of Moses perfectly. They held so tightly to the way that things had always been done that they missed the Messiah showing up in a form that no one was anticipating. They missed this Messiah showing up to usher in and set up a whole new system. They were completely blind to the fact that Jesus came to do for them what they could never do for themselves. And no matter how tightly they tried to hold on to this old system of relating to God, these people knew they were incapable of doing it. They knew they were incapable of living a perfect life. And if you think about it, you felt the exact same way. Because this is why we have religion. It's our way of trying to get to God. And if we obey these rules and we do these things, then somehow God will be pleased with us. And yet the reality is that Jesus came to set up a new system. Because none of us can live perfect. None of us can perfectly keep the laws found in the scriptures. See, in the moments when you try to be loving and kind, there's always that one person who can push your buttons and cause you to do things that you later regret. When you try to be merciful and forgive someone, you come across that one thing that you just can't let go of. That just seems unforgivable. When you try to live a pure life, you struggle with this addiction to pornography that just seems to hound you. And as a result, you go through life feeling like there is no way God can be happy with you. You go through life feeling like there is no way you can live up to God's standards. That's why people say things like, if I step foot in church, I'd burst in flames immediately. Now, I don't know why it's always the rednecks that say this. I don't know why it's a country person that says this. I didn't make up the rules, but we feel this way. We feel like if I show up in this holy place, I'm going to die on the spot because I know how sinful I am. And yet, we have this wrong image of God in our heads sometimes. Some of us see him as a tyrant. Some of us see him as this unfeeling, uncaring dictator. And I think that's why John tells us in verse 18, no one has ever seen God. We may have teachings about God, we may have ideas about God, but no one has ever seen God. But the unique one who is himself God, is near to the Father's heart. He has revealed God to us. See, what he's saying is Jesus is the unique one. He's a one-for-one. He is the one who is dear to the Father's heart. And he has come to help us see who God really is. Not the distorted picture of God that maybe you grew up with. Not the distorted picture of God that maybe you've been carrying around through most of your life. But God as he really is. See, this is the story of Christmas. It's the story of Jesus stepping down out of heaven, emptying himself of his privileges and humbling himself. It's the story of a God who loves you so much that rather than making you earn your way to him, he chose to come down to you. Jesus shows us the true picture of the heart and the nature of God, who is infinitely loving. He is infinitely humble. He is infinitely generous. He's the God who sacrificed everything for you. Philippians 2:6 tells us that though Jesus was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Which, pay attention to that phrase, cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. When he appeared in human form, he humbled himself in obedience to God and died a criminal's death on a cross. Now the phrase cling to, in the original language, it's harpagmos, which there's some interesting nuance to that word. Harpagmos means to seize by force, to cling to exploit, to hold on to for one's own advantage. And none of these things are true about Jesus. Jesus didn't need to hang on to his position. He didn't try to use his own power for his advantage. He emptied himself. He willingly gave up his divine privileges. Jesus chose to empty himself of glory. Jesus chose to make himself a slave. He chose to make himself nothing so that he could give you everything that is rightfully his. And in doing so, Jesus shows us the right way to go. He shows us the right direction for our lives. He shows us that the way up is down. He shows us that when we empty ourselves, we will be filled. In Matthew 23:12, Jesus tells us that those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. You see, every world religion has this metaphorical ladder. And we're not just going to have a metaphorical ladder today. We're going to have an actual ladder. Which, God help me, I am scared of heights. So let's hope I don't fall. But every world religion has this metaphorical ladder, with humanity at the bottom and a holy God at the top. And there is a giant chasm between the two. And every religion has these ideas and has ways that we're supposed to climb our way back up to God, or maybe to climb our way to God in the first place. And so for us, as believers, as Christians, or maybe just those who have come today to explore Christianity, you come to church, and in doing so, you take a step on the ladder. And you might not stop there, though. Maybe at the end of service, you decide that you want to give your life to Jesus. You are ready to make that commitment. So you take another step up the ladder. You're feeling pretty good. Look how close I am to the top, guys. You're thinking, I'm going to get there in no time flat. But then, on the way home, someone cuts you off in traffic. You decide to let them know that you think they're the scum of the earth. You give them the old one-finger salute, but now you feel bad. You think, I probably shouldn't do that if I believe in Jesus, so I got to take a step down. But that's okay. There's still hope, because you join a small group. Or maybe you decide to serve on Sundays. So, hey, you're getting back to it. And in fact, every time you show up, you take another step up the ladder. But then you kind of have a bad season where you get pulled into some gossip about a friend, maybe a coworker, maybe your boss, and you're talking about how terrible her split ends are. Or you're talking about how this guy smells like onions all the time. Or maybe their laugh is like the most annoying laugh ever. But now you feel bad, because maybe they find out you've said it. And now they feel terrible, you feel terrible, everyone feels terrible, and you got to take a step down. But it doesn't stop there, because you've had a hard season. And so maybe you say some things to your kids that you really regret. You shouldn't have said it, but in the heat of the moment, they got on your nerves, and you let some things fly. So now you feel bad, you got to take another step down. But it doesn't quite stop there, because now you feel tempted, and you start looking at some porn. But now you feel guilty about that in a way you never did. And so now you got to take another step down. And by the end of this, you're like, I'm just going to get off this ladder altogether, because I can't ever get up there. I was so close in the beginning. But now it doesn't matter what I do. I'm up, I'm down, but I'm never getting to this holy God. And I don't know if you've ever felt that way. But at some point, maybe you get off the ladder and you say, I'm not even going to follow Jesus anymore. I don't even believe Jesus is real anymore. And maybe that's where you're at. And what I wanted to say is, to some degree, I think God wants you to get off the ladder as quickly as possible. Not in the sense that you would abandon your faith. Not in the sense that you would stop believing Jesus is God. But that you would stop trying to earn your way to Him. He doesn't want you on the ladder. The ladder doesn't help you. In some ways, it keeps you farther away from Him. Because His heart is that you don't have to do this for you. He did it for you. And in fact, it's what we've been saying. Jesus came to do for you what you can never do for yourself. But we can easily fall into this trap, the same trap that every other religion falls into, where we think that we have to earn our way to God through the way that we live our lives, by meeting the demands of this God who is a tyrant and who asks too much, this God who demands that we tirelessly work to become a better person. And I don't know about you, but that's the way I felt. Even before I gave my life to Jesus, this is the way I felt about life. I had to get straight A's. And I mean it. If I got an A-, I would cry. An A- was not acceptable. But then when it came to obeying the rules, I would tell on myself if I did the wrong thing. I tried to be as obedient as possible. And so then I come into this relationship with Jesus. And I bring that same mentality to him. Where now I'm trying to do all the right things. I'm going to go to as many church events as possible. As many Bible studies as possible. Because if I do that, then maybe God will be happy with me. Maybe then I can make my way up to God. And I remember listening to a message by a preacher once. This is like 20 years ago. And he said, there's nothing you can do to make God love you more, and there's nothing you can do to make God love you less. Now, if I'm honest, I hated that for two reasons. The first is I thought, I don't believe it. I know all the things I've done wrong. And you can't convince me that all these things that I've done wrong don't somehow have an effect on God's love for me. I just can't believe that. But then in some sick, twisted way, I also thought, I know I can make God love me more. Just watch me do my thing. Watch me cook. I can do this. I can make God love me more by the way I live. And what I've had to learn ever since is I was dead wrong. Because the reason I don't have to earn my way to God is because it's already been taken care of for me. The latter is inconsequential to my life. Because Jesus did everything right for me, it doesn't always matter what I've done wrong. So what I do wrong doesn't somehow diminish God's love. What I do right doesn't increase God's love. Because it's not about me. It's about Jesus and what he has done on my behalf. And because he did it, I get to reap the benefits of that. And so now I don't have to earn my way to God. I already have a restored relationship with God. I can live out of that love. I can live out of that freedom. And sure, I want that to change my life. But the motivation really matters. The motivation shouldn't be, I need God to be happy with me, thus I do these things. It should be, I know God is pleased with me because of Jesus, and so now I'm going to do these things. Pay attention to distinction, because I believe the same is true for you. I believe this is the beauty of who Jesus is. He has flipped our mentality upside down. The way up is down. When we empty ourselves, he fills us. When we humble ourselves, he lifts us up. See, every other religion says that you have to climb your way up to God through your good deeds, through a reverent, sacrificial life. But Christianity is the only religion that says that God came down the ladder to you. What other religion believes in a God who would humble himself like this? What other religion believes in a God who would leave the glory of heaven to come find you? Because that is who Jesus is. He has emptied himself of glory and willingly subjected himself to death. This is the message of Christmas. He is Emmanuel. He is God with us. He is not this God who is far off, judging us, looking down on us. He is the God who is drawn close. He has stepped down into the world he created and made his home among his people. He came down to where we are so that he could show us the way to truly live. And what Jesus teaches us is that following him is not about being perfect. It's not about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. And it's not about being more religious. It's about following him in humility. It's placing yourself humbly under God's mighty hand. Emptying yourself of pride. Emptying yourself of selfishness. And releasing your need to be in control of your life. And 1 Peter 5 tells us that if you'll do that, then God will lift you up in due time. He is the God who subjected himself to a human birth in a manger, out in the middle of nowhere. He's the God who fully experienced what it means to be human, through emotion, through temptation, through rejection, through pain, and yet he lived a perfect human life. He was the God who took all of your sins upon himself. He took all of your shame upon himself. He died a brutal death on a cross, even though he had the power to save himself. But instead, he emptied himself of his glory. He humbled himself to the point of death so that I could be restored back to relationship with that God that we couldn't reach to on the ladder. Jesus came to do for you what you could never do for yourself. And yet here's the thing. Jesus won't make you believe. He won't force you to follow him. He won't demand that you make him Lord of your life. He leaves the choice with you. And so the question I want you to ask yourself today is Jesus the purpose of Christmas for me? And my friends, they've come up here to lead us in a song, to sing a song for us. And during this time, you don't need to stand up, you don't need to sing, you can just sit and reflect on the words of this song. And reflect on this question. Is Jesus the purpose of Christmas for me? Let this be a time where you tune out all the distractions, all the frustrations, all the hecticness of Christmas, and just sit for a moment to hear God's voice. And after this song, I'm going to come back up and close us out. But let's just spend some time reflecting on these lyrics and reflecting on whether or not Jesus is the purpose of Christmas.